So it's always a pleasure. Josh, thank you for joining us, and it's just always good to see you. Cheers.
Thank you for inviting me down at the last minute. You notice I wasn't on the agenda because it was kind of a little bit of a last minute thing. And as Amar said, I've been involved in the training industry since before the E was in e-learning. Actually, the first little company I worked with, we didn't even know what to call it. I mean, we called it learning on demand, and then somehow e-learning came along. So I've been helping companies and vendors and studying this for about 15 or 16 years. I'm now part of Deloitte, but I'm still doing the same thing. And we have a much bigger group of people doing research. Very excited to be part of this event because I'm learning about EdCast, and it looks like a really, really exciting technology that's exactly in the right place at the right time. So what I'm going to talk about for 40 minutes or so is the 10 disruptions. And normally this is about an hour and a quarter, but I'll go a little bit faster since I know you can listen to 700 words a minute. I'll talk as fast as I can. I'm going to talk about the 10 disruptions going on in the learning industry. This is based on research we've done. I actually spend probably 80% of my time in HR stuff now, maybe 20% in learning. But I found out from the HR Tech Show last week that the fastest growing technology spend in the HR domain is learning this year. More money is expected to go into the learning space. It's growing at a faster rate than payroll, HR, performance management, feedback, and all the other stuff that people are buying. So there's a lot of focus on this space and what you guys are doing, and I'll explain why I think that is. And so there's a little bit of a disruption story here. So let me talk a little bit about disruption. Every company that I talk to, in every industry, whether it be retail, manufacturing, healthcare, whatever it may be, is going through a disruption. A disruption caused by demographic changes in their workforce, changed by the adoption of digital technology. I'm going to explain what I mean by digital in a minute. A change in the speed of business and the rate of change of speed. I saw an email yesterday on my phone that Amazon.com is now opening retail stores. Apparently, I don't know. And that's how fast the business world changes. And then, of course, by the contractual relationship you have with your employees, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit. Employees don't belong to you anymore. They don't belong to their companies. It used to be when I got out of college, you went to work for a company and you pretty much planned on spending your life there. Now people move around. They have lots of transparency about what's going on inside your company and what's going on inside peer companies. They can very quickly assess whether you're the right place they want to work, and learning has a huge amount to do with that, as I'll show you. So those are very big disruptive forces. Added to that is the fact that digital is changing the business climate entirely. We have a big project at Deloitte going on called Digital DNA, where we've actually defined the 23 management practices of digital companies. And they are management practices. They have nothing to do with technology. It's the way you manage and lead and learn and organize the organization. This research we did with MIT, this was about 1,000 CEOs who responded to this survey and many, many interviews. 70% of them said they expected their company to be disrupted significantly within the next 1 to 2 years, changing the entire business model. And 90% of them, and 70% of them said, we do not have the right team, we do not have the right skills, we do not have the right leadership. And amongst the leaders that report to the CEOs, almost 2/3 of them said, if this company doesn't become the digital company I want it to be, I'm not going to work here because I don't want to work for a company that's a dinosaur. I'm going to find a company that is. So there's a lot of pressure now on transforming organizations. I'm sure the folks from GE talked a lot about this. I think GE is an incredible example of a company that has, taken a legacy of many, many histories over the time and is reinventing itself in a very significant way. And you can't really think about learning without thinking about this impact of AI and the future of work. I had this project over the summer to develop a big piece on the future of work. I did a lot of research on it, lots of people in Deloitte working on this with, and it has really changed. The world of technology has really changed. I entered the workforce in the late 70s, and I was there for the PC revolution and then the internet and cloud and all that stuff. The technology we're carrying around on our phones is not just another piece of technology. Your phone has 7 to 9 sensors in it. It knows the temperature. It knows how much light there is. It can hear your voice. It can actually sense the tone of your voice. It has an accelerometer. We haven't even figured out how to use all this stuff yet. And obviously, voice recognition, as you all know from these products, is the next big thing. I think, companies like Amazon with the Amazon Alexa tool, which is something that people in Deloitte are playing around with, it has the potential to transform our home lives. And so the technology is moving and disrupting businesses in almost every way. Here's an example of one, farm tech. I don't know how many of you are in the agricultural industry, but now companies like John Deere have tractors that have enough intelligence that they have a drone that will fly over the field and determine the nature of the soil. They will plow a field in exactly the right place to get around the dirt and the rocks. They will plant the seeds in the right spot in the soil. They will water them. They will monitor the humidity. They will monitor the growth. When the plant grows to a certain size, they will pick the appropriate fruit off the plant, all done by robotics and sensors. And this is in production today. So we're dealing with a workforce that is a little bit worried about what's going to happen to them. And there is a lot of research, I didn't put it in this presentation, on what is happening to the workforce. And it turns out that actually jobs are not going away. There are just as many jobs now, and there will be just as many after AI, but they're different. So the example I like to give is the automatic teller machine. When the automatic teller machine was invented, I don't know, in the 1970s, there were articles written about the death of the branch banking. There will be no more tellers. We won't ever need to go into a branch again. Well, guess what? There's almost 10 times as many branches now as there were before the ATM. We do lots more transactions on the bank than we ever did before, and there's 10% more tellers today as there were when the ATM was invented. They're doing different things. They're doing sales. They're doing customer service. They have jobs to empathize and listen and understand what you're saying, things that are essentially human skills that the old teller jobs didn't really have. So this whole influx of robotics and AI and technology is changing the nature of work in almost every job and making our jobs more and more and more human jobs, which are more what we might call soft skills in the learning industry, and less mechanical jobs thanks to technology. So that's one of the reasons that learning is so important. In addition to that, the research that I have an opportunity to co-lead at Deloitte is this big report we do every year called the Human Capital Trends. And last year's research, and I've done this about, I think, 3 years. Last year's research among 7,000 companies, here's the sort of the findings on priorities. The number one issue, which 92% of these companies said, was we are not organized correctly to succeed. Basically every company is saying we don't think we're organized correctly. Our org design, our job roles, our job models, our structures are not keeping up. And only 14% of those companies, by the way, believe they even know what the right org design is. By the way, if you look at learning, it grew by 400% in demand from the first time we did this study in 2014 to the 2016 study. So learning is also accelerating and increasing in importance in organizations. As John Hagel, one of the partners at Deloitte, talks about in terms of digital business, digital companies are different because they move from scalable efficiency to scalable learning. That's a very profound idea. You're not in the business of doing the same thing faster and faster and faster anymore. You're in the business of learning faster and faster and faster anymore. And that's what's making custom companies successful today. One of the reasons that the organization structure is such a big problem in companies is this, and I will only spend 1 minute on this because this is a whole nother talk, is that basically structures of organizations look like the picture on the left, but they actually act like the picture on the right. We operate and work in teams. We're basically tribal animals. There's psychological and actually physiological research that proves that we like to work in small groups. We spend more time with people who are physically close to our offices. This is why companies like Facebook have these giant campuses so people can stay close together and spend more time together. People are generally wired to have about 100 friends, by the way. I don't know if you know that, but your brain can only accommodate about 100 close relationships. That's about it. So companies like W.L. Gore split their businesses into 100 people units. So this is the reality of the way businesses work, and we're basically going through, in the HR domain, a kind of probably a 10-year journey into how do we redesign learning, career development, progression, talent mobility, collaboration to deal with a network of teams. And when you think about a network of teams, and many of you are very familiar with this idea, the worst thing that can happen in a network of teams is the teams don't talk to each other. And the book by Stanley McChrystal, which I think is one of the best business books I've ever read about the way they won the Iraq War, he describes the fact that when he decomposed the military in Iraq into teams, he had to create liaison officers that connected the teams together so that information would flow from team to team. And so one of the things we found, and I was at this summit, I was telling Sam I was at this summit last weekend, one of the things we found in learning is that connecting people to each other and building relationships between people and having a culture of sharing and tools of sharing like EdCast is critical to succeeding in the companies on the right. And even though your company might feel like the company on the left, it actually probably is much more like the company on the right than you realize. So that's a little bit of a context on what's going on, in organizations and disruption. And then the final point is this, and I think some of the other presenters already talked about this. We're all overwhelmed. And the way we actually wrote a report on this in Deloitte. And I get to experience this every day. If you ever work for a consulting firm, you know what it's like. And I'm sure it's similar at Accenture. We're getting too much information. We're getting too many emails. 40% of Americans don't even believe they can have a good family life and have an active career at the same time. We just published a report 2 weeks ago on millennials. Millennials now feel this way. Millennials want more work-life balance. They're having kids. They're at the age where they want to spend more time at home, and they're overwhelmed at work too. And I would suggest, being here in Silicon Valley, that one of the reasons that this has happened is that the companies that sell us tools have basically sold us all addictive drugs. And we have become addicted to them. And they make money by studying user engagement. User engagement means addiction. The little red circle that has how many messages on it, who can not click on that thing, right? I mean, those are the things that have made these companies so wealthy, but they've also affected us in our lives. And you know what it's like walking down the street and seeing everybody look at their phones. The number of people killed in car accidents has gone up because of texting. I mean, there's a lot of things that are going on that are not necessarily positive. In fact, the surprising thing about it that's really, I think, very, very important thing for you to think about as a learning person is this. Economic productivity after the iPhone has not gone up. In fact, it's slowed. If you actually look at US productivity, and this is right from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and a lot of economists are scratching their heads about this, this revolution that we're a part of right now, this fourth industrial revolution, is producing the lowest level of productivity increase of any industrial revolution before. The invention of indoor plumbing had a greater impact on productivity. The invention of the automobile had a greater impact on productivity. The original computer had a greater impact on productivity than this one we're sitting in today. And I think it's because we just haven't figured out how to deal with all of these new tools yet. And it may be a couple of years before this all shakes out. And so anyway, that's a little bit of context on what's going on, in the back of this, and the fact that engagement as an HR measure is also not going up. This is data on engagement from Glassdoor, and I've been looking at this data about 5 years. It is not moving to the right. The average employee engagement in US businesses and worldwide is not necessarily changing. Gallup is finding exactly the same data. People are about the same bell curve distribution of how well they like their companies. And there's always companies on the right, and there's always companies on the left, and I have an opportunity to talk to them all the time and see what goes on in these companies on the right. And by the way, one of the big drivers of engagement is what you guys do. It's learning. Learning in our model of engagement, which I didn't want to bother with this afternoon taking you through, I think of the 20 elements of engagement we identified, 8 of them are related to learning. So your ability to deliver a great learning experience goes far, far further than just improving productivity or performance. It's actually creating a brand. It's engaging people at work. It's giving people a sense of belonging in the organization and, of course, allowing them to fulfill their own personal mission in life. So it's very, very important part of organizations today. Okay, so that's a little bit of a quick warm-up here. All right, I'm going as fast as I can. So let me talk about these 10 things one at a time, and I'll go a little bit quickly. And maybe these are just things for you to think about, and then later we can have a conversation, in another forum about what they are. So number one, as most of you know, when you read the things in the press and you you look at what the World Economic Forum's come up with, many, many studies have shown this at a national level and at an organizational level. The more you learn, the more you earn. We as individuals can pretty much, basically the shelf life of our skills in most professional jobs is about 2 to 3 years. If you're a software engineer and you're not redeveloping your skills every 2 to 3 years, you're probably falling behind. Now, if you're a COBOL programmer and you're programming the old mainframes, at the companies that still have those things, you can probably make a pretty good living. But there's fewer of them needed all the time. So one of the things going on in learning that's really been a shift the last few years is that the individual employees in your company know that they have to learn to survive financially. If you don't give them an active, employee-driven, sort of consumer-like learning experience, it affects their personal self-worth or their personal value. That's why tools like lynda.com was sold, is that a Lynda person over there? Lynda.com was sold for 15 times revenue. How many of you have ever, that was a very expensive purchase by LinkedIn, because LinkedIn realized that providing consumer-like learning was a huge growth factor in the whole LinkedIn business. And I would be, I don't know the details on this, but I'm sure the deal that Microsoft did for LinkedIn was largely or somewhat driven by that as well. So the learning space has gotten very, very important as an economic factor. And if you even look at income inequality and all the studies and talk and articles and meetings that are going on in income inequality, study after study after study shows that the only way we're going to solve the income inequality problem is to fix the skills gap. And I was talking to Lee Rubenstein in line, but the things like what edX is doing to create micro master's degrees, to me is a breakthrough. Because the ability to learn and the ability to monetize and credentialize your learning has really been almost held hostage by universities for many, many years. And that's great for those of us that could afford to go to fancy universities. But as you know, 99% of the workforce doesn't have that opportunity. So this is something you can provide for yourself. I'm going to show you a picture a little bit later on of AT&T, but we do a lot of work with AT&T. Anybody from AT&T in here? AT&T is a company I know pretty well. I mean, this is a company that's been around a long, long time that has had to transform itself through almost every technology evolution you can possibly imagine. You can't imagine the amount of disruption that goes on in the telecommunications industry. AT&T has basically told their employees, if you are not reskilling yourself, and we'll give you all the opportunities to do that, if you're not doing it yourself, we don't even want you here. We're not going to spoon feed you. We're not going to tell you what to learn. We're going to give you lots of opportunities and lots of motivation and lots of connectivity to other people. But you're going to have to continuously reskill yourself. And that's a cultural thing in AT&T. So a lot of learning is about culture. Number two, learning as employment brand. Now, when I got a little bit more expansive in our research, and I moved from learning to leadership development to succession management to talent management to HR and all these other things I've been studying all these years, one of the things we ran into over the years is we started doing research on the recruiting market. And if you're in a fast-growing company, you know that recruiting is the most important thing you do. It is the most important thing you do. Getting the right people in fast enough will make or break your business plan. And around here in Silicon Valley, it's pretty much a war of competition. It turns out, if you look at the data, your ability to build a learning experience is a very important part of your brand. So first, let me show you this one. This is Glassdoor data where I correlated the net promoter score of your company. There's a question in Glassdoor that says, would you recommend your company as a place to work on a scale of 1 to 5? And then there's about 10 other questions about the environment in your company. And if you correlate that net promoter score against the others, what you find is that culture and values is the most highly correlated factor. Leadership is number 2, and career and learning is number 3. And you can see that career and learning is almost more than 2 times more important than compensation. So that's sort of evidence number 1. Evidence number 2, if you do the same slice for millennials, people in their 30s, 35 or below, roughly, they are even more focused on learning. I'll give you a little story that I like to tell in my personal life. My daughter, who's about 24 years old, works for a software company up in San Francisco. She's in email marketing. She's working on the Marketo Salesforce email stuff, and they had an opportunity to send her to Marketo training. She was all signed up to go. For some reason, at the last minute, they decided they couldn't afford it. They weren't going to send her. She comes home that night. She says, "Dad, I'm quitting my job. I don't want to work there. I want that training, and I'm going to find another job." It was that simple. And I said, "Well, just take it easy. You're probably going to get to go anyway." And she's still there, although she is looking for another job, because it's so easy to look for another job. But that meant a lot to her. I mean, that was a very significant event, to be given an opportunity to learn something very important in her job. So what you're doing is way bigger than the old ROI of training stuff that we've been talking about for year after year. You're building a brand inside of your company that attracts people. And of course, you're having a significant impact on the innovation process in your company too, which I'll talk about in a minute. And you know, surprising data on this, and this is really sad to me, but I understand why it happens. The research we just did on millennials, Deloitte does a lot of research on millennials, because Deloitte's basically a millennial company. Two-thirds of the millennials, I think it was 4 out of 5 of the millennials in this study, 7,000 people said, "My company is not using the skills I have today. And I'm not sure I can get the right opportunities to use the skills I have in this company." So one of the other problems we have is we're not giving young people opportunities fast enough. And I'm going to touch on that when I talk about leadership. But one of the things I've come to the conclusion is that those of us that are a little bit older, like myself and maybe some of you, we have our own unconscious bias. We think, "Oh, well, they're not ready for that job." Well, if you had a guy named Mark Zuckerberg in your company who was 31, do you think you would have given him the job as the CEO of the most powerful, most successful internet company in the world? Nobody in a big company would ever have given him that job. We have this whole issue in our organizations of providing opportunities and challenging assignments to people earlier in their careers, and that's part of learning. And I think that's one of the things that you guys have to think about in your role too. Number 3 is the growth. I mentioned the growth data on the software side. We do these every year. We do these big, massive surveys. They're getting bigger all the time on how much money people are spending on L&D. It keeps going up. Now, since the recession, we had a couple of years of kind of a little bit of a disaster for a couple of years, but a lot of money is going into L&D, and we know where it's going. I'm going to show you some data on that. So you're in a growth industry, and for people like Carl, who's new to the space, you've landed in a great space. It's a hot space. There's a lot of money being spent. Video is obviously taken over. When I was at Digital Think, and some of you I may have worked with back then, you know doggone well, video was impossible to use for learning in the early days of the internet. We had flash, we had bandwidth problems, we had plugins, we had players. Nothing worked on the phone at all. It was terrible. Now you can pretty much snatch a video on the back of a cab, put it onto YouTube, and it's up there. And in fact, YouTube is probably the best learning platform in the world. Most people, that are building learning platforms try to copy YouTube, because YouTube's turned out to be, an amazingly easy to use learning experience. 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, Workday announced their new learning platform. It is all about video. It's basically a video distribution system. It's a video campaign system, a video management system, a video curation system. It's a lot similar to some of the stuff you guys are doing here at EdCast. This is the future of learning. It's figuring out how to leverage and use and curate and understand video. I don't think it'll be too long before some of Carl's guys are actually write software that's actually listening to all the videos, transcribing it all, tagging it with skills, and then recommending videos based on the actual video content. I can certainly see that kind of thing coming. And I won't be surprised if 2 years from now we're all doing live video as part of our learning experience too, thanks to these tools like live video from Facebook and others. And of course, you can't ignore the fact that expert content is everywhere. When we were first doing research on MOOCs, and I know Sam and I talked about this many years ago, no one knew what we were talking about. Is it a cow? What the heck is this thing? It was only 3 or 4 years ago. People didn't even know what you were talking about. Now everybody understands it. There are dozens and dozens of specialized learning content providers out there. Great stuff. You don't have to hire an expert to come into your company and teach a class. You can probably find the video that he or she already put on the internet somewhere, and it's available through Big Think or one of these other content providers. Now, the tricky part about this, as a technology person, and you know this, is it's really hard to integrate all this stuff. And until the tools like Edcast came along, it was almost impossible. You had to have a bunch of different logins. Your LMS didn't really know how to talk to these different things. A lot of them were not AICC or SCORM compliant. They all have different learning experiences. Some of them are collaborative, some of them are not. So there's a little bit of a wild and woolly west going on, a little bit like it was in the early 2000s. But I think one of the reasons I'm kind of excited about Edcast is that one of the things Edcast has done, and I think using the edX platform as part of this, is built something that can sit in the middle. There's big market for something that sits in the middle between the LMS and the user. And the best name I've been able to come up for that is something like the Learning Experience Platform. And you know what I'm finding out is most people don't even know that it exists. They don't know what it is. They don't know why they should buy it. They think their LMS should really do all this. And unfortunately, the LMS market has not adapted fast enough. That's probably why Amar is not an LMS company anymore after his experience in the LMS industry. There's lots of reasons for that. But this is the reality of today. And one of your challenges is building this digital experience and tying together these tools to do it. And I think we've got some incredible new solutions available. MOOCs are not a mystery to the corporate world anymore. I mean, they were only 2 years ago, now they're not. So you guys are playing with these things. Now, the other funny thing about this is the MOOC companies all started as education companies. And I remember when they all started, I was always thinking to myself, I don't know how they're going to make any money. I mean, it sounds like a nice idea. They're eventually going to find their way to the corporate market. Well, now they've found it. They all, most of them really want to partner with you guys. Most of them are looking for opportunities to build branded content, to help you, to bring their subject matter experts into your organizations. So this market has really shifted into a market that can serve you. Number 4. I don't need to talk about this too much, but let me just show you a little bit of data. Going back from our corporate learning fact book from 2009 or so, it's 7 years ago. In 7 years, we've gone from 77% of the $130 billion spent on training, spent on ILT, to now 32%. That is a radical drop. And where has that money gone? Now, by the way, ILT is not going away. There will always be need for people to get together face-to-face and talk and meet and talk to an instructor and interact and do assignments and so forth. In fact, the Deloitte University location, which I would welcome any of you to come to, is a magnificent example of what a modern face-to-face corporate university is like. It has become not a university, but really like a corporate commons for Deloitte, where people go to meet each other and really learn and become part of the culture. So it's not going away, but what has happened, as you can see, is that self-study, virtual learning, and apprenticeship has exploded with growth. So the way I like to interpret this chart is that dark green stuff, a lot of it went into the dark red and the red. So what used to happen in the classroom is now happening on the job. Your managers and leaders and distributed learning professionals, learning business partners as they may be called, are the ones that have to go out and help people learn on the job, because everybody can't learn everything online. As much as we love video and technology, there are a lot of things that just happen experientially. So this is an example of how big it's changed, and one of the things that I know is evidence of this is, the HR functions around the world have gone through a similar change. It used to be in HR, you could have a bunch of HR generalists out there and a bunch of service centers to operate HR. The big trend in the HR domain is to build very senior business partners that operate locally within businesses, and those people are basically coaches to help leaders and managers deal with this issue of skills and performance at the local in the local organization. So that's what's been going on. And while that's been going on, and we know that people learn on the job, and this is research that I've done, and many other people have shown this, that most of the learning we do is on the job. No matter how good the class is, you really don't remember it until you go back and try to use it, and then you find out that you probably forgot 3/4 of it. It is hard to keep up, and L&D is having a hard time keeping up. One of the things that I hear a lot, and our people tell me all the time, that the CLOs tell them is, you know we need to do all this new stuff, but our L&D department still likes to teach. And actually the reason they went into L&D is they like to teach. We don't need so many teachers. We need people to do curation. We need people that look at taxonomies. We need people that understand technology. We need people that can build mobile apps, that can do design thinking. These are new skills. And one of the things I'll talk about at the end is the transformation of the L&D profession. Video is obviously big, self-authored video. I had a conference call. Thank you, Sam, for hooking me up with the guys over at Apple. I had an interesting conversation with Apple the other day about how they're thinking about redesigning the sales training they do based on expert authored video by salespeople, not by the training department. There are now tools that allow you to do that in an amazing way, share content and easily curate it amongst your team. There's also an explosion in tools for adaptive learning. I think this is very, very cool stuff. I don't know if this stuff exists inside EdCast yet, but I imagine you guys will build it. There's technology now that will look at your job role, determine what tools called spaced learning, give you just a little injection of learning every morning for 5 minutes to tell you the thing you need, and then based on your behavior as a retail person or as a plant floor, perhaps worker, what are the safety tips you need today that maybe you didn't get yesterday or you didn't get last week? There's some things here that are really cool that are going to help make the content more relevant. And of course, apprenticeship programs as well. I'm, a big fan of that. If I look at the research we've done on leadership development over the years, one of the best ways you build leaders is through coaching and mentorship. And coaching and mentorship has nothing to do with online learning or video or anything else. So that area on the right of that chart is one of the biggest levers you still have in the learning department, is to make sure that's happening, and it's happening in an organized way. As far as video, all of the LMS vendors are getting there at different rates of speed. I would say it's a work in process for the LMS industry. The poor LMS industry got all wrapped around the axle building talent management software. Good for them, but they didn't keep up on learning, most of them. They just couldn't. So they opened the door for tools like Intrepid and EdCast and others to come in and help give you better learning experiences. I don't think the LMS market's going away yet. At some point it probably will. In fact, I talked to a big company yesterday that just shut off their corporate LMS. But it is changing, and all of these new tools are basically helping you curate and manage all this new forms of content. Finally, let me mention this one on that topic, LinkedIn. The person from Linda is at LinkedIn, right? So LinkedIn announced something that's really interesting. It's not really an open learning platform yet, but it's getting there. It is basically, they have taken all of the data they have about people, where you've worked, how long you've been in what job, who your friends are, who your recommendations have been, a little bit about your skills, and they're now taking that giant database and trying to figure out how to recommend learning through Linda. And this is going to be very, very powerful. Now, I don't think it is, the plans are at some point to open that up, to you put your own content in there. But this is an example to me of how big the learning market has changed. I imagine that at some point in the near future, you'll be logging into LinkedIn, and there'll be a little red button that says, it's time for you to take a course in, Python or whatever it may be, because you're an analytics person and it doesn't appear to have appeared on your resume, and all your friends know it. And that's the kind of thing I think that's going on in these learning platforms that we have to expect to happen, in the future. And by the way, that's a consumer-driven system. I mean, the reason that that's been so successful is that that's something that helps people with their personal lives, not so much their professional lives. Number 5, decluttering content. Let me just spend 1 minute on this. We have too much content. Everywhere I go, we have too much content. Deloitte has this great business helping companies declutter their content. We call it forensic content analysis. And I'm not kidding. Deloitte goes, if you have too much content in your company, call me, call Deloitte. I'll have a whole team of people that can come in and show you how to find it all. Most of the research that Deloitte has done and with the clients Deloitte's worked with has pretty much found that if you think you know where all your learning is, you're probably missing 2/3 of it. 2/3 of your learning spend is going on somewhere where you can't even find it. There's content all over the world, and roughly 80 to 90% of the content you have isn't being used. This is the curve from a large organization that Deloitte did research with that basically proves that. And it's, it goes without saying, we've built content through these content libraries. We bought a lot of content from vendors that sold us giant libraries, and we always thought more would be better because we always figured people would eventually find whatever they needed. And you know what? They don't even have time to look for it. It's so hard to find it. So what's happening is we need to build taxonomies and we need to build architectures. I think tools like EdCast will make that easier. I like to show this one because it's a very simple architecture that's actually pretty old. This is a company that years ago, it's a technical company, product company, that said, you know what, we have 3 kinds of training in our company. We have training that teaches people introductory information. We want them to know what this product is. We'll call that level 100. It'll be self-study, and it'll be reading, and that's it. We're not putting any instructor-led training, no virtuality, nothing. Then we're going to have 200-level training where people have to actually learn how to use the product. And we need to give them some amount of experience using it and doing the work. We'll call that 200-level training. We'll have virtual ILT for that, but no instructor-led training, no face-to-face, no getting in airplanes. It's still online. And number 3, we'll have what we call 300-level training, which is you might call mastery training. And in their case, now you need to know how to configure the product. You need to know how to fix the product. You need to know how to implement the product in a complex environment. That will be done face-to-face. We will have instructors, we will have simulations, we will have labs, we'll have really high fidelity learning experiences. Very, very simple idea, but simply by doing that, they could take this huge mass of stuff that they had accumulated and group it into a simple model so people could find what they needed and they could have a language for content development over time. And I think where this is going, it isn't even, curation isn't even enough. I was just looking at the edX platform, the platform outside, and the way you have a little curation tool and you can add content in different parts of the system, that's a nice start, and I think curation is a noble effort, but you know doggone well you're never going to have time to curate everything in your learning system. It's not going to be possible. So we have to rely on machine intelligence, recommendations from others, and other tools to do that. And this is something that I'm doing research on and we're trying to help the industry do in general. And anybody that has some cool stuff in that area, I'd love to talk to you about it. Number 6, design thinking. How many of you know what design thinking is or have taken a course in design thinking? Okay, so that's good 2/3 of you. I actually think design thinking is one of the most profound changes that have happened in HR and L&D in the 15 years I've been involved. Because everywhere else I've gone and all the research and education I've had about it in the old days was using the ADDIE model. Here's a problem, let's study the performance challenges people are having, let's design, with a D, a solution, let's implement it, let's train people how to use it, let's roll it out, let's do change management, let's do reporting, and then let's beat them up over the head if they don't take the courses to make sure they take it. We'll give them a compliance dashboard like they do at Deloitte and send a bunch of nasty emails, but we'll really get people to take this stuff. Design thinking is the opposite of that. Design thinking is, don't design anything. Just study the user and empathize with the user and find everything in their job that's holding them up and really study it carefully. And people that do design thinking actually don't do design. They actually do a lot of user analysis and then build something very small and very simple to try to interject into that flow of work to make work better and iterate on that over time. Examples of design thinking, and I don't know if GE talked about this earlier today, but GE's new performance management system was developed as an MVP using a hackathon for design thinking. IBM's performance management system was designed by the employees at IBM using a hackathon in 8 weeks using design thinking. Nike's onboarding was redone during design thinking. I've now talked to onboarding at companies like AT&T and Telstra has been done with design thinking. Design thinking is a whole different way of thinking about what it is you're here to do. And I won't spend a lot of time on it right now, but that is a profound change in the way you think about L&D's role. One of the things about L&D, and I really like the fact that the GP people mentioned this, is that we can't solve any problems at work by interjecting one learning activity at one point in time. We have to look at the journey of an employee through their job, the first week, the first month, the first quarter, the first year. And what do they need to learn at all those different steps? And I love that GP chart with the curve. If we don't think about our jobs and our solutions in terms of the overall journey or the journey map of people, we're just going to be throwing more stuff out there which may or may not be useful. So that's, that's number 6. Number 7, I'm going to go a little bit faster because I'm running out of time. Careers, really interesting topic. Careers have completely changed. First of all, we're all living longer. You want to read an interesting book? Read the book, The 100-Year Life by Linda Grattan. It'll really shape your head. We're going to have a lot to do in 100 years. By the way, all our kids, most of our kids will live to the year, into their hundreds. Most of our children will. We're going to have many careers. Life will not be education, work, leisure. It will be education all the time, work all the time, leisure all the time. We've seen evidence of this all the time. You've seen all the data on how many jobs companies or people have today, how rapidly people change jobs in this transparent work environment. The really critical thing about this new career model is that if you don't have an open and transparent talent mobility process inside your company, your gears are going to grind against this. You will not be able to attract and retain the right people that you want to have in your organization. I met with the CHRO of a very successful, very well-known brand company 2 weeks ago. We were talking about this issue, and she said, the way careers work in this company? It's a hazing process. You go through 20 years of hazing, and if you survive, you can become a VP. And if not, you can go somewhere else. And she said, I hate to say that, but that's exactly what it's like. And those of us that have survived it, doggone it, we're going to make sure other people go through the same thing we did. I've been there. I work for big companies too. That's not going to last. That just isn't going to work. And that's a cultural thing. That's a reward system thing. It's going to affect our own personal, sort of experiences at work. But this is really a transformational change. A lot of books have been written on this. One of the things that it does question is the whole idea of the career pyramid and the idea that people are actually going to move up the pyramid in a deterministic way. Deloitte 5 years ago, 6 years ago, Kathy Benko wrote the book on the career lattice, which was probably ahead of its time. But that is really happening in companies today. And I'm talking to a lot of companies that are doing this. I was telling Sam, I was with a company last week that is one of the most successful consumer product companies in the world. And that company, everybody you meet is in a new job all the time. The people in HR have worked in sales, they've worked in marketing, they've worked in operations, they've worked in manufacturing. They're rotating people around constantly. It's part of the culture of that company. And the only way that will work is if you have a culture of learning so people can learn quickly in a new job. If you're expected to go into a new job and perform the first month, you can't have a culture of talent mobility. The company won't work. So your job, in a sense, as a CLO, is to be part of this conversation and make sure that the career coaching, the career development, the ongoing support of new people in the job is available throughout the organization for internal candidates as well as for external candidates. Okay, a little bit on that one. Number 8, leadership. Most of you in L&D or in CLO roles own the leadership development mission. That's usually the case, not always. And the world of leadership is a sort of a strange, funny place. We just launched a bunch of research on this. I think it's the 2nd or 3rd time we've done it. It's a funny market of books and pundits and magazines and articles and all sorts of experts on different leadership models. 2 books this year, one by a professor at Stanford, another one by a professor at Harvard. Basically, both said the same thing. The leadership development industry is a fraud. Most of the books written on leadership development are about one person's experience in one company at one point in time. And yes, if you read all of them and tried to figure out what they all meant, you probably could figure out what that applies to your company. But it's a very, very company-specific problem. What we found, and by the way, it's also a very bifurcated market. There's companies that spend a lot of money on leadership development, and then there's the 31% or 38% of companies that spend almost nothing, which boggles my mind. But I think the reason for that is that a lot of companies that are really, really successful don't think they need to develop leaders. They think their leaders are fine. And when they're doing well, they're just, moving along. And then all of a sudden something bad happens and they decide, oh, geez, we don't have the right people here. What happened? And so I think you have to think of leadership development as a never-ending investment. It's like painting your house. You got to paint it every couple of years before it starts to peel off, because when it does, it's a little bit too late. The big trends in leadership, I won't spend a lot of time on this, and this is research we just did, and to some degree it's new and to some degree it's not, is that the most high performing activities you do to build leaders are systemic. They're action assignments. They're giving people exposure to other leaders. They're mentoring. They're rotations. They're allowing and forcing people to take risks. Creating a matrix structure. One of the things we found in the high-performing leadership companies is that they're matrix companies. People have lots of different jobs. They don't just have one job. They don't have this whole team working for them and everybody's reporting to them. They also do other things. And they develop much more connected leadership. One of the things that we've seen now at GM, we've seen this at Nestle, we've seen this at several companies, is if you study the most effective innovation and new product groups in your companies and what it takes to what have those leaders done to make them successful, over and over and over again, the research is showing is that one of the most defining characteristics of those leaders is that they are highly connected inside of their own companies. They know what other groups are doing, and they're able to leverage that and use techniques or technologies or tools that other people are doing. And if you go back to that very early slide that I showed you about teams, the company that invented the digital music player was actually Sony. Sony was almost a decade ahead of Apple before the iPod came out, but it was a small team, and there were actually 5 or 6 teams doing the same thing, and they weren't talking to each other, and they weren't thinking about how they would all fit together into an ecosystem and how they would get third-party music in there, and so they all failed, and Apple, which took a more integrated approach, obviously became a huge success. So this leadership issue is not just a training problem. So that's a couple things on that. And by the way, the other thing on leadership I'll just mention, all the research we've done through the human capital trends still shows that you're not spending enough time advancing and developing millennials fast enough. Young people need to be put into leadership opportunities before they're ready. They need to learn on the job. They won't tolerate waiting 15 or 20 years to get that job as a director or a VP that maybe took you or me 15 or 20 years to get. That's just the way the world works today, and that's the way we have to think about the leadership marketplace. Okay, so that's a little bit on that one. By the way, the other chart that I just skipped by, and one more point on leadership, we did a massive study that came out last year on talent management around the world, in Asia and Europe and the United States. We looked at, 100 and some odd, talent practices. Of all the practices we measured and we correlated them against financial outcomes, the one that was the most predictive of high-performing companies was having an inclusive environment. Building a culture where people feel they can speak up, where they feel that their voice is heard, where they feel that there's fair and transparent decisions being made, that data is available to make sure we don't have unconscious bias. You've seen the things Facebook, Google, Apple have taken their unconscious bias tools and put them out on the internet so other people can use them. You have to consider that in your leadership and learning programs. You're also, to some degree, is responsible for making sure that the inclusion and the diversity part of your company is working as well. Okay, number 9, L&D. The L&D function, somebody was mentioning to me earlier, we wrote the High Impact Learning Organization research in 2005 or 2006 the first time. We've done it a couple times since then. We've seen over the years that running a learning function is really hard. I don't think it's easy at all. And you guys at Accenture, I can imagine how difficult it is. What's centralized? What's distributed? How many people do we have in the central group? How many people do we have in the distributed group? What do we set standards for? On and on and on and on. What the research has shown, though, is you have to organize it and you have to build a federated structure. One of the things we found in this research is that the larger, more successful L&D organizations are less centralized. They're more federated. That doesn't mean there's chaos, but there's more distribution of function. And in addition to that, they really have to focus on reskilling their people. There's this concept in software of the full stack engineer. You know what a full stack engineer is? It's somebody who knows database, they know middleware, they know graphic design, they know HTML, they know all the stuff they need to know. Those guys are worth, or gals are worth a lot of money because they can deal with problems end to end. We need to build basically full stack L&D people. It's not enough to be working as a trainer. It's not enough to be an instructional designer. You also have to understand design thinking. You also probably need to understand taxonomies. You probably need to know something about mobile. You probably need to know something about core learning technology. We all have to upskill ourselves. And this is part of, basically being a professional today. And these are things we've seen over and over again. When companies say to us, we don't know how to build a digital learning strategy, what they're really saying is the team hasn't educated itself well enough on what their role should be and how they're going to do this. And that's, by the way, one of the reasons we exist, is to help people do that. And then the last one, let me just conclude with that. I know I just went over, so I apologize, is the role of the CLO. I actually think, I don't have data on this, I think the number of CLOs is going down. I think as a job title, it's becoming a little bit less popular. And that's actually not good, but I think it's the reality is that a lot of the CLO stuff that we used to talk about in the early part of the decade has turned into the chief talent officer or the chief culture officer, the chief people officer. It's kind of been taken away. And I don't believe that's a good thing. I think there's a huge, huge role for a CLO to exist. And I think as a CLO, you have to, in many ways, push yourself on people and explain that your job is bigger than people think it is. And let me explain to you what I mean by that. All of the things that I mentioned, capabilities of the organization, adopting and understanding and embracing change, driving culture, anything. By the way, you saw the human capital trends data. I think it's 86% of companies said that culture is an urgent priority. You own culture. You are in many ways a communicator and driver of culture. You are a driver of engagement. A lot of CLOs also run the engagement process. I don't think that's a bad idea. By the way, if you want to get a little bit of a bigger job, why don't you tell your boss you'd like to run the employee engagement process too, because in some ways you have as much impact on what the employees do every day as anybody else in HR. You're responsible for figuring out careers. And then the last one, this idea of connections. When we were in Switzerland last week at this meeting, one of the things that came up in all of these companies, we talked about innovation, that the learning experience is the most connected place in most companies. When you go to the corporate university, or you go to the class, or you go to the training materials, or whatever it is, that oftentimes is one of the only places where you get to meet different people in the company in different groups and different geographies and different functions and get to know them and understand what they do. And that is one of the key drivers of a digital organization, is being connected and being able to draw upon other people in your organization when you need it. So my challenge to you is, I think you have to be bold right now, and you have to step up and deal with all these things and understand that your job really covers every one of these 6 or 7 items, and it's much bigger than just building great learning. So anyway, I want to thank you all very much for inviting me. It's great to see a lot of old friends, and I'll be here for a little while longer.